this character, something I've been interested in since I was a kid.
Hey.
That was my favorite comic book, and I collected it.
How you doing?
I can't
It's
look
just
at
an
it anymore.
addition.
I just hate it.
Yeah.
I hope you're doing well.
And all of that, almost all of it, got cut out of the movie just for pace.
Here's a fun little story. When I was a boy, I saw Ben Affleck's Daredevil, Mark Steven Johnson's Daredevil in the theaters opening night with my grandfather and my mother, and apparently, I was too young to remember, halfway through the movie, I got up, stood up in the packed audience and asked, more like proclaimed, "Where's Stick?"
You fucking moron.
When my dad later heard of my grand proclamation, I don't know if I'd ever seen him prouder, considering he used to read me the Marvel Essentials Daredevil collection as a bedtime story. Considering one of the few times I saw him cry as a kid was reading Daredevil Yellow to me after school. I loved Daredevil as much as any 5-year-old can. I loved this movie. And I think all of us emotionally damaged, edgy kids born in the late 90s adored Daredevil 2003. I remember dancing around my grandma Lois's living room to the Evanescence music video that was on the DVD, fully believing that I was Matt Murdock soaring through the gritty, cool blue tones of the streets with a bombastic, edgy guitar accenting my every move. But with a lot of things you or me once loved, over the years, the culture, the discourse convinces you that your nostalgia is blinding, your taste terrible, and your love misguided.
Don't understand. This isn't just a bad comic book movie. This is a bad comic book movie from the early 2000s.
Which gives Ben Affleck an excuse to show off his stupid cross-eyed dirt face.
But listen, I'm not here to tell you that Daredevil 2003, and specifically the director's cut of Daredevil 03, is a hidden gem in the sea of comic book movie muck. I'm not here to tell you that it's misunderstood. You can come to your own conclusions, good or bad. I'm here to talk to you instead about the chaotic, downright insanity that went on behind the scenes. I'm here to tell you a tale as old as time about a filmmaker with a genuine passion for an icon that means a whole lot to a whole lot of people, getting fundamentally screwed over by a studio who did not trust him nor the character of Daredevil. But before we dive into Daredevil, how about you look at this gorgeously well-crafted, insanely cool metal Daredevil poster from today's sponsor, Displate. Displate's the perfect sponsor for me, because if you ever break into my house at 4 in the morning to kill me, on your way to my bedroom, you'd find that my entire apartment is covered in pop culture wall art. Displate has literally anything you could think of, dream of, with over 2 million pieces of artwork available, everything from new and original pieces to light up your home, to officially licensed designs from all your favorite brands. We're talking Star Wars, Marvel, DC, Netflix, way too many to name. And with their new Displate texture, they have taken metal posters to the next level with improved tactile textures, 3D contours, and various eye-popping and eye-catching effects. Look at the texture. Yeah, I could fluff this up with words, but just look at these, dude. I can finally have a big daddy watching over me while I take my morning poo. I have Marty looking down over me, inspiring me to keep creating. Daredevil and Jason Todd inspiring me to keep going. I can have all that without the hassle nor worry of my landlord Bob evicting me because I put 1,000 holes in his wall. Displate comes with the tool-free magnet mounting system, entirely safe for your walls and super quick to set up wherever you please. And you can swap plates like this, bam bam done. Ultra fast shipping, customizable sizing. With Displate you can turn your home into something that truly showcases your passions. So please go to displate.com/HiTop Films or use my code HiTop Films to get a special discount, 27% off 1 to 2 Displates and 37% off 3 or more. Available this week only. Act fast, it's a great deal and steal, and every purchase you make helps support the channel. Thanks, guys. Let me take you back to 1997. Fox has just bought the film rights to Daredevil from Marvel. Christopher Columbus co-writes a screenplay and plans to direct. You can read a draft of that screenplay online. Comic book legend J.M. DeMatteis writes a treatment based on Columbus's draft. You can also read part of that treatment online. The executives at Fox, they aren't too pleased. They do not make the movie. The rights go back to Marvel. It's 1998 now, and Disney wants to buy the film rights to Daredevil. This is long before Disney owned fucking everything. It's 1999, and on the verge of bankruptcy, Marvel does not sell to Disney, but instead to Sony Pictures. The executives at Sony hire Mark Steven Johnson to write the screenplay based on his pitch and passion for the character. It's 2000 now, and Sony, guess what? They cancel the project, giving up the rights to the character. It is still 2000. New Regency acquires the rights with Fox set to distribute the film. Mark Steven Johnson has to pitch himself again and again.
The only person I could really convince about this movie, about me doing Daredevil, was myself, to be honest. I mean, I knew I could do it.
He gets the job, and work begins on the first film adaptation of Daredevil. You Google the man's name, Mark Steven Johnson, and what you'll see is a bunch of movies that you've probably never seen, with ratings and reviews ranging from to goddamn, man. And of course, not just one, but two iconic Marvel characters' first big screen adaptations. Nicolas Cage's Ghost Rider, which is a video for another day, and of course, Ben Affleck's Daredevil. Daredevil was Mark's second feature film. His first was a $20 million movie, Simon Birch, that bombed at the box office, not making its budget back and ended up being pretty much panned by critics. Simon Birch also has some of the funniest posters I've ever seen.
Let the devil out!
So how did Mark make the jump from gushy drama to big screen superhero action? How did he get $78 million, a star-studded cast, and the ability to make a serious Daredevil movie when most people had no clue who Daredevil was? The short answer? He fought for it, again and again.
I remember Gary at one point said to me, just give up. You're not really going to keep trying. And I said, yeah, I'm going to go try it again. He was just like, Jesus, man, move on, do something else.
Fairly, the studios were saying he'd never done a movie like this before as a director.
The biggest challenge is to look at the studio in the eyes and say to them, trust me. Why?
Mark Steven Johnson, who's that?
In this case, you can't blame the studio, you can't even blame Avi.
Enhanced powers.
For not trusting an inexperienced filmmaker, for not trusting the idea of Daredevil when superhero movies were either huge hits or very prolific misses. But Mark, he persisted, goddammit, even if during production it felt as if every single one of the head honchos was not only against him, but was seemingly embarrassed by the concept of Daredevil.
And at some point you just feel like, you know, you're fucking Joan of Arc and you're hearing the voices. You're going insane. Because I have so much going on, there's so much to do, I cannot satisfy and listen to all these different opinions.
And I mean, this isn't just a case of them wanting cuts, wanting the movie to be more romantic for the Valentine's Day release, wanting it to be a breezy action film with a pinch of romance, a hint of censored violence, some paprika seasoning, and paper-thin archetypes. This is one of those absurd cases where, even before filming began, the notes were flying in like a blind vision bullet. Absurd notes that read like pure comedy. You ready? I'm making none of this up. The studio at one point were terrified that the Daredevil costume would look too much like Spider-Man's.
It's a fake.
Costume designer James Atchison, who had worked on Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, says it best.
Within a week, I got these frantic phone calls saying, the concept has to completely change. We don't even think we want it to be red. We certainly don't want it to have horns. They're freaked out that it might look too much like Spider-Man.
There was a conversation at one point, maybe he's a guy just wears a sweatshirt and jeans and he's just a vigilante thug.
And I took a call from a group of executives sitting in a projection theater, winding a test piece of film backwards and forwards and having a 40-minute conversation about the color red. That's how crazy it got.
Which you can clearly tell, because this is a very red costume seen in all the behind-the-scenes video stills and promotional material, but in the actual film, looks black 90% of the time. Now, me personally, I have never hated this costume. Honestly, I think it's one of the best versions of the 2000s leather-clad comic hero. But just from the concept art, test footage, I know that whatever Mark and company had originally planned before the studio's fear led them astray would have been even more cool. That much debate went on with just the fucking costume. The costume.
I want a fucking costume.
Can you imagine how much struggle went into the actual shoot? The filming days kept getting cut down. The producers wanted the movie finished as fast as possible. Mark had to keep asking for extra filming days. He had to keep asking for more and more time to make it right, to make it good. For comparison purposes, Tim Burton's Batman took a total of 166 days to shoot. The first X-Men, 163. Sam Raimi's Spidey, 144. Daredevil had just 61 days to shoot its main photography and an additional 28 days for the second unit, which is frankly fucking nuts for a movie of this size scale with a filmmaker who had never done anything like this before. And for him, for Mark, it was a literal pressure cooker.
For me, especially, I'm already struggling because I've never made a movie this size. They wanted everything, but they didn't want to give us the days. But was always that kind of pressure and threat of you're going over what was an unrealistic schedule to begin with.
I mean, it nearly killed Ben Affleck too. Look at him, it broke him.
This is how it ends, folks. This is how and where.
And then he stood up like, yeah.
I don't reckon like. That pigeon hurt.
The frustrating part for Ben right now is I'm beating on him in so many different ways.
You know, wearing the wire rig sort of feels like you'll never be able to have children in the future. It's great because, you know, adoption is a route that I am okay with. Run, clear, had fun, had some pride at one time.
I have something I want to show you. It's a body part.
Close the fucking door.
Shut the fucking doors.
But somehow, they managed to do it. Mark managed to do it, and not a single one of the actors had a bad thing to say about him. The film? Sure. But watching the behind the scenes, you can tell how they were all impressed and enthused by Mark Steven Johnson's unparalleled passion for the character.
Mark was so passionate and enthusiastic about the material, being faithful to the original material, and the vision he had for sort of bringing it to life, that it was inspiring.
Mark Steven Johnson, who wrote it, with such a labour of love for him, and he's got such passion about it, so that's great to be around.
Mark is one of the hugest Daredevil fans on the planet, and somebody with the clearest vision of almost anyone I've ever met. He had been planning this film in his head since he was 14 years old.
Mark Steven Johnson's ability to cope with the vagaries and changes of opinion on this movie was remarkable. I'm so impressed with this young guy who can absorb that kind of pressure.
I mean, apparently he wrote to this fan site right here asking the author what he thought about certain story ideas, showing him storyboards, keeping him in the loop, which would be unheard of now, just as it was kind of an insane thing to do back then. And you know what? To me, given all the things going against Mark, going against the production, he still manages to have the sauce. From the opening credits with the overwhelming gothic score, the blue tints of CG NYC morphing into Braille, you can tell that Mark had a specific, exaggerated vision for how Daredevil should feel on the big screen. The first shot, a twisting camera taking us from the reflection of a seedy puddle, a grotesque rat scampering across the forgotten streets of Hell's Kitchen. We rise all in one camera move that they should not have edited these shitty jump scares into. It's just, no. Taking us higher and higher, passing the ancient stained glass, the years of practiced faith, blood dripping down while we are still moving up higher and higher until we finally see our bleeding horned hero, our tragic figure, half dead, half in hell, gripping to the church's cross for dear life. This is the first image of Daredevil ever put on the big screen, and it has the weight, the gravitas that it should. You are in the hands of a filmmaker who clearly gives so much of a shit, who believes for better or worse that the story of Matt Murdock deserves to be this grand, this full of care behind the camera. The iconography throughout the whole movie is treated biblically with the utmost respect. You have to remember this is a few years before Batman Begins, when superhero movies were still finding their perfect footing, and yet you are getting panels come to life like this. Daredevil is filmed with such comic book camp, such kineticism. Mark Steven Johnson and cinematographer Erickson Core, what a cool name, give us an overabundance of iconic, seldomly still, beautifully sweeping images. I mean, look at this dude. We go from an extraordinarily well done CG image of Daredevil that they tried to film practically, landing on the roof of Josie's bar through the ceiling, descending all the way down to this shot with the reflection of this scumbag in it. That is in the first 20 minutes of the movie, and it pretty much never, ever stops. Drenched in shadow, lighting that is almost always heightened, feeling ripped straight from the artwork of David Mazzucchelli, Joe Quesada, Ramita Sr., Ramita Jr., adapted with a Matrix 2000 punk leather aesthetic. Mark had the sauce, a vision for the character that the extremely talented crew aided with grace. Massive soundstage sets that perfectly translate the height and grit of Frank Miller's NYC, miniatures galore, hand-painted and crafted props, actual extras filling up the frame, making making it feel like the city that never sleeps. Visual effects were not an all too common crutch yet, so there's so much stylish and over-the-top practicality in every frame, every chunk of action. I'm gonna butcher this, but Chung Yang Young served as the choreographer, Jeff Imada was the stunt coordinator. These guys have worked on everything from John Carpenter classics to the Matrix and Jason Bourne franchise, all the way through Point Break, LA Confidential, Batman v Superman, too many to name. Daredevil soars here. His cane/billy club/grappling hook was just about the coolest thing 5-year-old me has ever seen, and it's still so cool now. This is maximalism on full display. Suit-up montages directed like music videos, over-the-top wire work where characters legitimately fly across frames, super jumping and super spinning in a way that is so unreal. Daredevil will take the time after breaking the bones of all these goons just to walk across a perfectly on fire pool table. He will jump down, landing his boot perfectly into a puddle while his broken ankled prey scurries away. He will take the time to paint DD in gasoline just so we get that image reflected in the hazy glasses of Ben Urich. Why? Because it's fucking cool. That's why.
Bullseye.
Matt and Bullseye will fight on the giant pipes of the church organ. Bullseye will pop a wheelie on his motorcycle, hands off the steering wheel on his way to kill Elektra's dad. Using peanuts, paper clips, playing cards, and pieces of shattered stained glass, the anime fast attack his enemy.
Want peanuts? Please.
It's fucking cool, man, and fucking creative all the way through. Is it too much? Of course. Is it campy? Without a damn doubt. But you can feel the love, the joy, like a kid in a candy store finally having the budget to throw everything he has into the stew. I'm obsessed with that energy, inspired by it. I mean, dude, watching Daredevil now in today's age, I would kill for the average blockbuster to have a single drop of the sauce this does. Comic book movies nowadays have the biggest tools, the biggest amount of audience support, and the biggest budgets. How about the filmmakers and studios start using them as much as this 42% on Rotten Tomatoes film did back in 2003? Those green squashed Rotten Tomatoes, they had the sauce. Let me tell you another story. I know you're probably sick of my childhood memories, but this one might just have a point. I remember walking into the Exchange one day. Do you guys have those, or is that just like an East Coast thing? Let me know. Anyways, I walk into the Exchange to look for movies I had never seen before. I was at the age where I started to buy random DVDs and Blu-rays by myself purely based on the title and the font used on the side of the box. In my search, I find the DVD of Daredevil. At first, my eyes scrolled right on past it, considering I had worn out the VHS tape and already owned the deluxe edition with all the behind the scenes. I had watched those behind the scenes on loop. Maybe that's why I'm doing what I'm doing today, not just in this video, but in my life, in my passion for filmmaking. And I remember doing a double take because there was a small little text after the bold title, Director's Cut? I kinda knew what that was. I mean, kid me, he knew that an extended cut, Director's Cut just meant more movie. I love this movie and wanted more movie, so I bought it. I went home, popped it into this flat screen I had won off a Cartoon Network giveaway, I'm dead serious about that, and was genuinely in shock. Not because I was cognizant enough to realize just how screwed over Mark Steven Johnson was on the theatrical cut, or old enough to want to start a Twitter campaign, but because the director's cut was and is a fundamentally different movie. There was a time before.
There were perfect things. Diamond absolutes.
Before the Snyder Cut was released, before the Donner Cut was released, before the unreleased 1994 Fantastic Four film would ever be openly discussed. Hey, sign this petition so it can be officially released and check out my buddy's brilliant video. There was the Daredevil Director's Cut, released shortly after the film to make that extra buck in DVD sales.
The luxury of the DVD business. Enhanced powers.
This was my first exposure to really understanding how different a few scenes, a few extra pauses can change a filmmaker's work. I'm not going to break down everything different, that would take an entire video, but I will break down the fundamental changes that were made in the theatrical cut that actively work against the themes, the plot, and the character of Matt Murdock. First up, Matt's mother is alluded to, even shown subtly, which I love. The movie is overstuffed already, but I think this is a perfect Easter egg for the fans that has a gothic mysteriousness to it. The iconography is great, and even if the casual audience member was confused as to why we were seeing this image, it's something they could have really dived deep into if a sequel was ever made. Plus, it made Frank Miller cry when they cut it.
I remember telling Frank Miller that I had this scene and I had to cut it out, and Frank was going, "Oh, you're breaking my heart, man."
Karen, and if you're like me, you often forget that she was even in this movie, played by Ellen Pompeo, has a little bit more to do here and doesn't just feel like a random name drop. The father-son relationship is far more shallow. Instead of getting lengthy scenes depicting Jack and Matt's complicated relationship, you were only treated to little bits, snippets included in the flashback montages. There isn't that much of a difference time-wise, maybe 30 seconds or so cut down, but removing shots like this, removing the cheers for his father, the blinding light of pride that is cast upon the devil and his son, makes the entire thing feel more like bullet points the filmmaker have to hit rather than crucial life-defining moments that inform Matt's entire character, making Jack's death and Daredevil's motivation feel far less heavy.
I heard you talking in his office. I hear everything.
The entire second act of the movie feels like a music video in the theatrical cut, more so than ever intended. Scene transitions are jumpy, character relationships start to not make much sense, Matt comes off way more insensitive and way more like an aloof prick for no reason. The characters, the performances, all suffer from this MTV ADHD you got games on there style editing, starting with Colin Farrell. His performance as Bullseye in the director's cut works a lot more, even as a piece of pure camp. Because his scenes are separated, spread out, they build and build the insanity shown in smaller pieces more and more. It's digestible instead of something that feels like it's too heavy to eat. The studio decided to cut the smaller moments, the more subdued moments in his performance, the looks, the glances beneath Bullseye's magic show that makes him feel more three-dimensional. There's a difference between spouting a one-liner and stabbing someone to death and forcing a disgusting kiss on someone's dying breath. Forcing that kiss knowing full well that the man who loves her is unable to stop it as he hears the final pitter-patters of her heart begin to slowly fade. Kingpin's now infamously iconic intro, the one that begins with that cheesy line and huge cigar puff in the theatrical cut,
somebody always does,
is missing the most crucial piece of Kingpin development, a moment that immediately establishes his violence, his rage.
Back in ancient times, they would cut the tongues out of their bodyguards their first day on the job.
A moment that makes Wilson Fisk and not generic mob boss of the week. Too violent for the kiddies, right? Speaking of violence, all of it was massively toned down because for some reason, I have no idea why, the original cut was considered R-rated, which is fine. In theory, the studio wanted PG-13, Mark Steven Johnson and company intended to shoot a PG-13 movie. Problem is, those quick deletes that remove some of the more gruesome hits and bone snaps, removing them really upsets the rhythm of the fight scenes. Pretty much every fight scene suffers from certain shots being tossed into the fucking dump. What was once fast-paced, quick cut, but still rhythmic and clear action becomes something that is choppy, hard to follow, and feels amateur as all hell, making not just the fights look goofy, but the people behind and in front of the camera look bad. Which blows, man, because even if it isn't the best action you've ever laid your pretty little eyes on, it's still very stylish, it still was very cool, and was very Daredevil. But above all else, the one who suffers the most is, as he always tends to do, Matthew. His character gets assassinated, butchered. He goes from someone whose feelings and emotions you can relate to, can understand, can follow, empathize with, to a 2D cutout of an emotionally distant, downright vacant, hot, self-pitying sad boy. Dad?
No.
Of course the small stuff adds up, right? The very comic booky but badass lines like this.
Who made you judge?
You did.
Or this.
Everything I have has been taken from me. Now I'm supposed to ask for mercy. I don't ask for mercy. People ask me.
Being subbed out in service of lines like this.
I tried, Father. I tried. This is who I am.
Which makes absolutely no fucking sense.
This is something you wouldn't understand.
Not only did the studio decide to take away from Matt and Foggy's brilliant chemistry,
seeing eye dogs bond for life. Yours ran away. What does that tell you about how emotionally available you are?
We're living a lie. I have to go next door to the pizza place every time I gotta take a dump.
I'm running the pizza place. I'll be right back.
not just the moments of Matt actually being a defense lawyer, not just his intelligence, his detective skills, his compassion, his loneliness, not just everything that makes the movie make sense, that makes it flow, that makes Ben Affleck's performance feel like a true, serious attempt at adapting the character, not just the cutting down the censorship of the bruises, the knees cracking like the aged legs of an old boxer, the removal of the realistic extreme pain Matt is in after the bar fight, the pain that he hid from all his prey, the scars the devil's horns hide, the ones that will never fully heal. But it's the horrendously misguided decision to chop out the main plot, the main character arc of the fucking movie that leaves me the most deliriously dumbfounded. The most astronomically ass-backwards choices you could have made were made. I'm sure the studio, the bigwig Belfort types would argue that this is a subplot, something easily disposable, but of course they would say that. We are talking about the same people who were afraid of the color red. You think they understand Daredevil?
The theatrical cut felt very much more like a revenge story of Who Got My Girlfriend, and that was never what the movie was supposed to be. The movie was supposed to be about the hero of Hell's Kitchen, you know, the guy who stands up for the underdog.
A plot which begins when Matt, after allowing Quesada to die, tries to lock himself in isolation when he hears the horrifying cry. The death rattle of a prostitute getting murdered somewhere in the kitchen. He makes the choice to drown out her screams, the screams of someone overlooked, forgotten, judged.
Why the big cover-up in the death of a prostitute?
A choice he probably has to make every single moment of every single day. If you cut this kind of scene out of my movie, I would literally have tossed the edit into the trash entirely, flown said trash halfway across the world just to dump it in the fiery flames of a volcano. The scene is so haunting, it's raw, it balances out the camp that is yet to come, it makes Matt more tragic, it's just
Enhanced powers.
Turns out the feds are blaming Coolio, Dante Jackson, for her murder, a goofy but good-natured stoner ex-con who passed out high nearby. Nobody believes that he's innocent, nobody except for Matt.
I believe you. You do? Get yourself defense.
Thank you.
Who chooses to take the case like he always does, knowing full well there is no glory nor money at the end of the trial. This is the Matt Murdock that I fell in love with, the kind of guy who goes after the dirty cop, not dressed as Daredevil, but as himself.
Gotta love that new car smell, huh, Mackenzie? What the?
This scene is not in the movie.
Take it easy, Mackenzie. We'll go for a ride. It's a nice car. Where'd you get this? Jesus Christ! You're crazy. Yeah, I'm crazy. Who killed Lisa Tazio?
The Matt Murdock that Ben Affleck wanted to play, the one that Mark Steven Johnson wanted to create, translate.
One of the things I always loved about Matt Murdock was how he'd stand up for the little guy. You know, how he'd be able to take the case nobody else would take. That was all stuff that was really integral for me in the story. And all of that, almost all of it, got cut out of the movie just for pace.
Sure, you could argue that the lawyering, the case itself, is a bit cliche goofy. You could argue that, and I'd probably agree with you. But I'd argue that this supposed B-plot is a part of Kingpin's story. It's what leads Matt to discover Fisk is the Kingpin. It's what makes him realize that he can be the protector of those deemed guilty in the eyes of a corrupt society. What I can't fathom except is believing that those scenes weren't worth reworking, were not worth our time, and that the movie would play better without them. This is not true. It's not.
Bullseye.
In fact, most reviews at the time talked about how the story wasn't there. The characters all felt one-note sad all the time without reason. Edge for the sake of it.
It's tough because the criticism that I have heard of the movie has been mostly that there's not enough story, which is why I'm so glad that there's a director's cut. This is like the story version of the story, you know? So that's hard. It's always hard to hear criticisms of something that you know are probably right and that you have to agree with on some level.
The theatrical cut makes Matt look like a single-minded horn dog for Elektra with nothing else in his life going on other than brutally beating on people to get his aggression out. In that version of the film, the one that they released, he decides to ignore the innocent cries of someone in need so that he can bang Elektra. This does not happen in the original vision of the movie, because the original movie isn't trying to desperately appeal to the people who came to see the movie for a shirtless and steamy Affleck, even though I enjoy that too. In the original film, he abruptly leaves Elektra in the rain, which explains why he is reluctant to go to the charity ball, which explains why he and Elektra have an air of miscommunication throughout the entire film.
I'm really sorry about the other night.
You're here now.
Not only do all these cuts take away the core characteristics that make Matt, it lessens the impact of everything. It creates a muddled and confused story that loses the central point, not just of the film, but of the damn character. That by just taking the time, the care, the compassion to give a shit about Lisa Tazio or Dante Jackson, by showing empathy to those who have seldomly experienced it, he is able to uncover the Kingpin. A man who not only abused, contorted a system that exists to help people, but who, in this tale, killed our hero's father, his dad.
Ultimately, what I like about it is that by representing someone that no one else would pay attention to, that leads to the biggest fish in the city. You know, the great lesson about it all.
So at this point, if you're sane and this is driving you insane, you might ask yourself, why? Why cut the core values of the character? Surely, the extra 29 minutes aren't too much to ask an audience to sit through, considering the theatrical cut is a breezy 1 hour and 43 minutes. 2 hours and 13 minutes is actually short for a big movie like this. The answer? Straight from the horse's mouth.
I don't think in the commercial marketplace that, you know, the intellectual content necessarily is as important as the quick, exciting experience of this kind of a movie.
What a tragedy, believing the audience cannot handle something with a little more depth, a little bit slower a pace, cannot handle the humanity behind the horns, nor the desire to see the soul behind the blind eyes. The only silver lining here is that most streaming services, most Blu-rays only contain Mark's original cut, the director's cut, making this the now definitive version of the film. But still, we're left with another classic fucked up fairy tale of the Hollywood dream. Another classic case of the people with the dough being so micromanaging, so overbearing that the original vision gets squashed, chopped up like a piece of cheap meat and served to us obese, overfed, hungry masses like an Evanescence flavored burger, leaving us with a chill we can't quite shake.
Soon the world will know the truth.
I saved this for last because I think in order to fairly talk about the narrative of the film, I had to explain to you everything that went into chopping that narrative in half. I had to explain the genuine ludicrousness of the studio. I think both cuts of the film suffer from Mark being too much of a fan. He wanted to put everything in. I wanted to do Daredevil's origin story, and I wanted to do the Elektra saga, and I wanted to introduce Bullseye and Foggy, and I wanted everything to be in there, but the film could only support so much. And then when you're told to cut a half hour out and make it more of a love story, things start to feel rushed and not quite right. It's a fan thing. When you love something so much, you want to tell it all. And he's right. Matt's journey tries to cram a lot into too little a time frame. I bet you're shocked I haven't mentioned this yet, but yes, Matt does kill here. And no, I do not think it works, even if this might be the better version of Ben Affleck playing a character with a mostly defined comic book no-killing rule that does, in fact, indirectly or directly kill people because he's at a point in his life where he has lost all hope.
Make no mistake, I will fucking kill you.
Isn't that funny? Matt lets a rapist piece of shit get run over in the best possible fashion.
Guess what? That's not heaven. I'll kill you, I'll kill you. That's the C train. I'll kill you.
What a banger of a line. But if you're going to make Daredevil kill, there has to be a point, right? And I'm not sure if I fully understand the point that Mark Steven Johnson was trying to make. Perhaps this version of Matt was always okay with passive death, letting someone get killed but not taking a life with his own hands. Perhaps everything is so terrible and so corrupt that he sees no other way, until he realizes sometimes what he deems as evil wears an all too familiar face. A petty criminal beating on an innocent. The devil is there to stop him, as he always is, as he has to be. So the devil uses the anger of the innocent, his anger, beating on the criminal again and again, but with each punch, the devil's pain doesn't go away. It never does. More hits, more bloodshed. This is hell and he is its protector. He hears the cries, not of fear from the sinner, but those of an innocent child, afraid for his dad.
I'm not the bad guy, kid.
Who is he telling that to? A child whose father has turned to crime to get by? A boy whose dad beats on people, telling himself that he is doing what he needs to make rent to support his son, to live? Was Jack Murdock a bad guy? In the eyes of Matt, he wasn't. He was struggling, trying to get back up, like we all are.
I'm not the bad guy. I'm not.
Is Matt the bad guy? Where is his moral line? Does he have one? Or is this scene, probably my favorite scene in the movie, the birth of that line? He chooses not to seek revenge on Fisk, not to impale him, perhaps because he's seen the violence, the suffering, the loss that revenge can cause. Or perhaps it's because he needs to be there for all those young kids whose parents made the wrong choices. Those young boys crying in the shadows, afraid the devil will come for them like he did for their fathers, as if they've inherited the darkness, the sin. Maybe Matt, the devil, needs to be more, as he puts it himself in the final line of the film.
A guardian devil.
I wish we saw more of that. I wish less time was spent on Bullseye chugging a pint and killing a dude who calls him Irish trash with a series of paper clips. I wish we got more of the fine lines that we would later get with the brilliant Netflix show. Netflix's Daredevil pencils in all those fine lines, creating one of, if not the best, comic book adaptations ever. The characters are subtle, their silence says just as much as their words, the drama never feels fabricated, it's all too heartbreakingly real. This movie, by nature of not having 13 hours to tell its story, by nature of being the audience's first real exposure to these characters, paints in huge broad strokes. Ben Urich doesn't have time to be rich and detailed, only the time to be a likable character. Elektra has to state her backstory, we do not have the time to witness it. Kingpin has to remain an archetypal powerful force rather than a fleshed out tortured soul with entirely twisted ideals. The Netflix show is the pencil, the film is pure ink and color with hints of the line work we all adore. And that is entirely understandable. Rewatching Daredevil for this video, I am still just as in love with so many elements of the story that young Alex was enamored by. I love how this is the first comic book movie to show us the scars, the bruises, the painkillers, the broken teeth. The first and perhaps the only one to give those wounds their due, their time to shine. I love Matt's gothic apartment with cold steel and literal angels protruding from his walls. I love that the brightest thing in his apartment is his father's boxing gloves. I love all the voiceover, even if it is corny. I love how it was the closest thing we had to Frank Miller's Batman voice, the cold whisper that tragically reflects upon his life until we finally got the Batman.
Violence doesn't discriminate. comes as cold and bracing as a winter breeze off the Hudson until it sinks into your bones, leaving you with a chill you can't shake.
I love this line.
I can't see you dead. I can't see you.
I love that I can say I love all those things because the movie is taking Matt seriously, and it did not have to. Mark Steven Johnson could have just made a pure camp fest. Avi could have produced the shit out of that. Perhaps the studio would have been happier with something lighter, more swashbuckling. Ben Affleck could have phoned it in, which despite popular opinion, I truly believe he did not. He was born to play a deeply depressed, unsettled, heartbroken vigilante who hangs around gargoyles at night. Ben clearly gave a shit considering that. The only movie I actually regret is Daredevil. It just kills me. I love that story, that character, and the fact that it got fucked up the way it did stays with me. The entire film is imbued with such passion behind and in front of the camera. Everyone was giving all they have and then some. And I know some of you might view that as misguided considering how the theatrical release and the subsequent response turned out. Some might think that all of Mark's pleading, his belief that there needed to be, that he needed to make a serious Daredevil movie, was useless, was in vain. But I have faith that it wasn't for nothing. I'll leave it to the words of Ben Affleck. Matt Murdock lost Elektra to Bullseye when I was just 12 years old. That saga touched and moved me in ways I was then and still now am reluctant to admit even to myself. I was fascinated by this man, this red-suited saint who always seemed to end up a martyr. It was my own personal introduction into the world of personal ambiguity. It was a dark corner, a place where my sympathies were uncertain. It was a strange and wonderful place where true love was always tragic. Heroes had a dark side, villains were roguishly likable, and the best one could hope for was some sliver of redemption. I felt the same way as a 5-year-old kid in that theater. Maybe I didn't know I felt that way yet, even though I knew who Stick was, somehow. Maybe seeing a story where the hero's power comes from his vulnerability, his disability. Seeing a story that took that seriously, that took depression, loneliness, anger, and treated it as complex feelings that cannot be rescued, that cannot be cured, but can be channeled into an attempt at doing what's right. Maybe that changed me, just as Batman, Spider-Man, and all those greats continue to do for myself and so many others. However many years later, when I skipped school to binge all of Netflix's take on the character sitting right next to my Jack Murdock, I felt the same immense joy, stress, and inspiration as I did back in that theater. All those years later, the devil finally got his due. And perhaps that would not have happened without the absurd, insane, inspiring faith of a man named Mark.
And I'm anxious to get it out, and at the same time I'm really protective of it, and I want people to treat it kindly. I know some people won't, and it's just the nature of it, but I feel very, very protective of the movie. And, you know, this is like my mythology, and these are the guys that I worship and I respect. And that's probably always been my biggest concern, is making sure the fans feel satisfied at the same time the non-fans will understand it. You know, it's the real life world of a superhero. To me, that's interesting. I don't know if anybody else will find it interesting. I'm hoping so. But again, at least it's true to what I wanted to do. And that's, you know, all you can ask in the end. So.
Justice.
My hands! My hands!
That's my pen.
Bullseye.